Chapter 2. Focus and Preparation. As you know, Gurdjieff made many remarkable discoveries, but he made one special discovery that stands above all the rest. He found an ancient dance-like ritual exercise, many thousands of years old, which he calls the chief exercise. Life is Real, page 136. For an all-round assimilation of both these assisting, or as they might otherwise be called, helping exercises for the mastering of the chief exercise. He mentions what he calls the chief exercise in only one book, and only once. Well, actually, he does speak of it again many times, but he never again calls it the chief exercise. Several of his prepared old pupils also mention the exercise, and even describe parts of it, but not under that name. The chief exercise is Gurdjieff's buried dog, at least part of it. There is a bit more to this than just an exercise. This exercise was designed by ancient initiates as an aid in the development of higher bodies. Gurdjieff discovered this ritual exercise in a special serious school in Rosso, Turkestan, learned it well, then researched and verified its effects. He then buried clues to this ritualized form, still taught in traditional schools of a certain art, in his second and third series. But why did he bury those clues? As masters throughout the ages have said, and as Gurdjieff now says, years of preparation are required before a pupil can benefit from the ritual. Without right preparation, the exercise has little effect. It has no magic, and not 1 in 1,000 would benefit. Part of that preparation is what you have been doing in your years of wrestling with Gurdjieff's writings. His writings, along with the efforts you've made, have been creating a state of being in you that will enable you to see through the veil of Scheherazade, so that you can finally see and benefit from the real instruction carried in his third series. His efforts and yours have been focused on the one goal firmly set by Gurdjieff, and intuitively accepted by you as your own. That goal, the focus of all of his work as a teacher, is spelled out in accordance with the sacred law, Tria Masi Kamno, in 2 parts. When those 2 parts are combined, they produce a third something, which in this case is a clear statement of his goal. The first part is found in the addendum to a herald called the circular letter. This is where, among other things, he says that he offers the possibility of entering together with others upon the true path and attaining, by the help of my detailed and written explanations, to real being. At first glance, real being seems a rather nebulous term, but he tells us in his usual way exactly what that means. Beelzebub gives us its fourth-way meaning in the chapter on purgatory. When similar coatings of previously coated tertata cosmoses were completed and began to function correspondingly, then from that time on they ceased calling them tertata cosmoses and began to call them beings, which then meant two-natured. And these same second coatings alone began to be called bodies Kesh-Jan. Beelzebub's Tales, page 764. By the blending of those 2 excerpts, we see that his detailed and written explanations are to help us attain Kesh-Jan body. There is no real being short of that. Also, as we will cover momentarily, Kesh-Jan body must be brought to a high level of development, to completion. In his detailed explanations, Gurdjieff initially gives us 2 major areas of focus, which we will cover briefly here, and then develop further in later chapters until we are eventually focused firmly on these 2 areas, which are physical work and the breath. About the physical, in fragments, page 350, he says, "Ordinary man, even if he comes to the conclusion that work on himself is indispensable, is the slave of his body. He is not only the slave of the recognized and visible activity of the body, but the slave of the unrecognized and the invisible activities of the body. And it is precisely these which hold him in their power. Therefore, when a man decides to struggle for freedom, he has first of all to struggle with his own body." While that does not explain, it does indicate the reason behind Gurdjieff's heavy emphasis on sacred gymnastics at the priory. First of all, we have to struggle with our own body. Although we no longer have Gurdjieff in the flesh to drive us to exhaustion in his sacred gymnastics, the ritual exercise will provide all of the struggles with your body that you could possibly wish, and perhaps a little more. The second area of focus is breathing. This excerpt is also from Fragments, page 387. Right exercises, which lead direct to the aim of mastering the organism and subjecting its conscious and unconscious functions to the will, begin with breathing exercises. Without mastering breathing, nothing could be mastered. At the same time, to master breathing is not so easy. To repeat the essential sentence, without mastering breathing, nothing can be mastered. Do you think Gurdjieff would leave us, his posterity, uninformed in such an essential area? Many, perhaps the majority of so-called followers of Gurdjieff believe that, but that is just the majority and does not include those Patriarch Knott calls these unfortunates. As Knott tells us, and we will cover again shortly, this teaching is to help these unfortunates, people like us. These unfortunates intuitively know the instruction Gurdjieff promised is included somewhere in his books. It is up to us to find it, understand it, and then do it. That is what this field guide is about. Now let's consider the preparations required. Preparations. The preparations required to achieve our goal can be roughly divided into 3 groups. The initial or exoteric level of preparation consists of a good familiarity with Gurdjieff's books and ideas. But all too often in our efforts to understand, we turn to the writings of others, as if conducting an opinion survey will somehow help. An unintended effect of our survey is that we subject ourselves to the distraction and interference of others. But Kesjan will not be developed by any opinion survey. Only our personal struggle with Gurdjieff's writings will accomplish that. Gurdjieff offers help by his detailed and written explanations, not by someone's interpretation of his explanations. The opinions of others, even his so-called first-generation pupils, many of whom were members of only the exoteric beginner or mesoteric middle groups, carry little of value. Gurdjieff alerts us to this in several ways. His section on maps and cartography in meetings is allegory for his criticism of such opinions and books. Then there are his more direct warnings, as in the following conversation with Knott, found in chapter 8 of Journey. I said, "What about people who have never met you or will never meet you? How will they be able to understand Beelzebub's tales?" He said, "Perhaps we'll understand better than many always around me. You, by the way, you see much of me and become identified with me. I not wish people identified with me. I wish them identified with my ideas. Many who never will meet me, simple people, will understand my book." With that, Gurdjieff points out the lack of understanding of many always around me, those we tend to think of as his first-generation pupils. But the majority of those were merely guinea pigs, hangers-on and passers-by, Herald. Gurdjieff's warning against being identified to him will apply to all guinea pigs, all pupils of the beginner and middle groups, and even some of his later esoteric pupils, including Charles Stanley Knott in his early days at the Priory. It does not apply to the later Patriarch Knott, who, along with Dr. Sturgeonville, Frank Pinder, and Hartmann, were among the inner esoteric circle of pupils. The general lack of understanding on the part of those who circulated in and around the Priory is emphasized in Patriarch Knott's first book, Teachings of Gurdjieff, in the last chapter, Postscript, page 225. While spreading his teaching, he had to adapt it to people of different levels of development. In a group at mealtimes, for example, he used hyperbole, exaggeration, joking, seeming contradiction, saying something to one person while meaning it for another, which was bewildering to some, who often took him literally and made strange statements on what they had misunderstood. In spite of being members of only the beginner and intermediate groups, some have written books or booklets about things they heard and misunderstood, or understood only at the theoretical level. As a result, many have wasted years studying books written by guinea pigs, beginners, and theoreticians. As long as one relies on others instead of his own hard-earned personal conclusions, he will make little progress. Next are the second-level preparations of the Mesoteric or middle group, which in the old days was concerned with studying the theory of Gurdjieff's system while learning certain handicrafts and arts, as Gurdjieff mentions in Herald, page 37. The study, by special methods, of different trades, handicrafts, arts and domestic sciences is included in the programme of the Institute. That same course of study applies today, but we no longer have Gurdjieff and his associates to speak to us of the theory and coach us in handicrafts and arts. Today that instruction comes from the detailed and written explanations of Gurdjieff's books, particularly the third series of his writings. For instance, by combining two passages, one from Herald and one from Life is Real, Gurdjieff gives specific instruction on the study of a particular art in a special way, which is one of our fundamental and advanced preparations. We will cover that art and the method by which it is to be exploited in a later chapter devoted exclusively to that practice. I think you will come to appreciate how blatantly Gurdjieff conceals that instruction. Today, in addition to theory and arts, a little something more has been added, something that entails following Gurdjieff's friendly advice to read his books 3 times, not only in the usual way, but in a way that makes most of us feel self-conscious and a bit uncomfortable. But self-conscious or not, if you will read and ponder his friendly advice, you will see that Gurdjieff says upon that particular practice depends our gaining impartial judgment. Impartial judgment is required both for seeing his second series clearly and as preparation for recognizing and understanding the instruction found in his third series. By following his friendly advice, we will gain some good portion of impartial judgment, which is one of the basics. It is a prerequisite for understanding his second and third series. As for the preparations of the third, the esoteric group, as with everything else in Gurdjieff's third series, that instruction is concealed. Some instructions are buried under mounds of words, or given as just by the way. Others are hidden behind a prominent foreground, while kept in low profile in the background. Some are even stated in several parts scattered across his books as pieces of a puzzle. Those advanced preparations are the first game we must hunt. We must find them, understand them, and then complete those preparations of our own volition. To find them we will need benefit of impartial judgment, which is produced in large measure by the method of study mentioned in Gurdjieff's friendly advice. Although lightly given, that is serious advice and carries serious benefits. You should know that this field guide is written for and will be useful almost exclusively to those who are already well prepared, that is, those who have studied the books which I and a few others consider to be the fundamental fourth-way reading list, including Gurdjieff's 4 books, the 2 main study guides by Patriarch Knott, Teachings and Journey, another study guide by Thomas de Hartmann, Our Life with Mr. Gurdjieff, along with one and only one of the several books by Ouspensky, Fragments of an Unknown Teaching. Coincidentally, Gurdjieff's 4 books, Knott's 2, plus Ouspensky's and Hartmann's 1, each give us 8 books, a full octave in our study list. This field guide is based on those 8 books and is more or less a summary of what I have learned from them as a result of study and regular performance of the chief exercise. I suggest any serious student of Gurdjieff's ideas concentrate on those 8 books for the simple reason that, if we wish to make progress, we must learn to focus our efforts. But why, aside from Gurdjieff's books, do I choose the others? Ouspensky's book is chosen by Gurdjieff, who upon hearing some of it said, "It is as if I hear myself speaking." His approval is thus limited to parts of the book where he is speaking, and does not include places where Ouspensky is speaking, places where he explains his sometimes poor understanding of Gurdjieff's remarks, or sections where he goes off on lengthy speculation ideas of his own. As a rule, with that book I pay attention mostly to the remarks of Gurdjieff. The primary exception to that is where Mr. O describes Gurdjieff's silent communication on page 262, thus confirming one of the properties of Kesdjan body. If you are not already personally familiar with Gurdjieff's endorsement of fragments, then you should study Patriarch Nott's 2 books well. You will find his endorsement there. If you have already done so, then you should know that Fragments is the only book by Ouspensky endorsed by Gurdjieff and his 3 associates, Dr. Sturgeon-Navarre, Frank Pinder, and Patriarch Nott. We should follow their example and regard everything else by Ouspensky as distraction. As for other books useful in finding Gurdjieff's buried dog, there are precisely 2, both by C.S. Nott. His 2 books are not only useful in general, but contain some details that are essential for a grasp of Gurdjieff's more advanced teachings. These essentials are relayed by Nott and 2 others, Gurdjieff's right-hand man, Frank Pinder, and Mr. A.R. Araj. In Teachings we find Nott's collection of some of Araj's carefully selected remarks, some of which were dictated to Araj through correspondence with Gurdjieff, as we will cover later, without which we could never grasp Gurdjieff's true meaning. Araj's remarks are found throughout Nott's books, and then in concentrated form in a chapter titled Araj's Commentary on Beelzebub. However, in this I refer to Nott and Araj's version of the commentary only, and not the more recent expanded revised version by Lawrence Morris. My very good reasons for that will become clear a little later. In Nott's books, we are introduced to a new language when Frank Pinder tells us that Gurdjieff's primary mode of speech is picture form language. We are also given a hint to the initial key to that language by Nott's review of the officially neglected Herald of Coming Good, which carries Gurdjieff's teaching example of that language. Both of Nott's books carry numerous other items that, altogether, form a much-needed bridge between the mind of Gurdjieff and our minds. As I will be drawing heavily from Nott's books in order to make good use of what I say, you should have a good familiarity with his writings. That leaves Hartmann's book. Although when I first read his book I did not realise its importance, with continued work and study I have come to regard his book with great respect. In your study of Journey you will perhaps notice that Patriarch Nott includes Hartmann as among Gurdjieff's chosen few, and the Patriarch's opinions are not to be taken lightly. While perhaps not required finding Gurdjieff's buried dog in the first place, after we have found it, Hartmann's book aids greatly in understanding what we have found and its significance in our lives. Also, and most importantly, Hartmann's book gives what for some will be the key to understanding, in usable form, the rhyme and reason of being part dog duty, or conscious labour and intentional suffering. I will include remarks from his book here and there, and then a brief look at what I consider his most important contribution in a later chapter. In my opinion, his book is also essential, and any serious follower of Gurdjieff's teachings must reread that book carefully, or obtain a copy and, as is said, wear it out. Now, if focus on what we study is important, as it obviously is, then focus on how we study is of at least equal importance. In fact, it is one of our essential preparations, and we will see what Gurdjieff says about that next. Gurdjieff's advice on how we study is the initial base upon which all of our further progress stands. He introduces us to this method by way of a small drama, just as drama was used during the Babylonian period to convey certain impressions and truths within the body of a play. So Gurdjieff uses it for similar purposes in the prologue to Life is Real. As you begin the next chapter, put on your go-to-theatre mindset. Think and feel drama. Visualise his opening remarks as the opening scene of a play staged by Gurdjieff for your benefit. as you would in any other theatre. Go ahead and enjoy the play, but don't forget to look for the instruction it carries.